So this is a reposting of an earlier video that I did. Hopefully it's much appreciated because this came from a subscriber's request that the video was inadequate in audio. So I just dropped the audio on this video. I keep all of my videos in stock. Believe me, I pay for the storage, so I have it. But anyways, without further ado, here is the video.
Back in for another video. The video that I want to discuss is going to be an addition to my other video about our reality, your reality, my reality, and of course the fantasy. Well, what I want to touch on a little bit more is how reality can affect your fantasy and how fantasy can affect your reality. A lot of people don't understand. I know I say it a lot, but it's true. It's very true that a lot of people don't understand these things. Maybe I should stop saying that because by now y'all should get it that a lot of people don't understand this shit. But how this works is people live in a fantasy world for a good portion of their lives. I mean, we have to a certain degree. We have to a certain degree. And we're used to doing that to a certain degree because that's how we, come to understand things. And that's how we create. That's how we, how we do a lot of things that we do. I'm starting to think, and I want to say that masculinity is the reality and femininity is the fantasy world. That's just the thought at this point. I haven't cultivated enough in my mind to explain that, but I think I could. But anyways, we're just going to go with the fantasy and reality and how you can't maintain both of them at the same time. You cannot maintain them both. Think about it. So if I live my life every day, let's start with this first saying that it's often said that if you think too much about what you're going to do in the future, you won't have the time to do what you want to do in the reality. Well, if you fantasize about or contemplate hard about whatever, for a very long time, you're going to run out of time in the reality to actually make change or to do whatever it is that you're thinking about so heavily. That's because you can't maintain both of the worlds at the same time. It's very, very hard. I know there are people in this world who can do it, but there aren't many. It's very, very hard for people to be able to fantasize while creating their reality or maintaining their reality. I think I'm gonna name this video reality maintenance or fantasy maintenance. I don't know, something like that. But anyway, so you can't do this. I'll give you an example. The men that we call blue pill men. It's not really akin that they live in a fantasy world. People hint on this a lot, but they don't come right out and say it. But I'm going to come right out and say it. A lot of blue pill men live in a fantasy world because they change their focus from the reality to a fantasy world, because you can create fantasy worlds a lot of time, but the more people that you add to it, the more likely it is to fail. In the case of marriage and children and, co-workers, etc. The more people you involve in your fantasy world, the more likely it is to fail. I'm not saying having a fantasy world is a bad thing, but you have to learn how to maintain them both. We to a degree, we have to have a fantasy world because this is how we evolved as humans. We become to predict the future and plan for the future, because once again, the future is a fantasy world because it does not exist in the present reality. It only exists in your mind. It only exists up here. And, so we need that to a degree, because we can imagine that the next winter is going to be horrible. So therefore we need to cultivate all of our, resources to plan for that upcoming winter, and maybe shortage of food, shortage of water. But this is all a prediction, because it does not exist in the reality. Prediction due to trend, past trend, which does not exist anymore as well. But the past is kind of different from fantasy. But anyway, a lot of people mess this up though, because they stay too long in their fantasy world. When you stay too long in your fantasy world, your reality starts to crumble. The reason why this is because you can only use your mental capacity. As much people say they are multitaskers, no such thing exists for the majority of people, because it's already been scientifically proven that your mind just switches tasks really fast. You're not actually doing two things simultaneously, and that goes for your fantasy and reality. You can't maintain them both at the same time. Like I said, there are some people who can, but majority of us can't, because they are true definition, scientific definition multitaskers. But here's the thing: blue pill men. So they live in this fantasy world for so long within their marriage, and then I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and this is kind of how all these conversations come about. But this is something I've talked about for many years already. I just landed on video at this point. But what happens is these blue pill men, they get caught up in this fantasy world that they help create with another one who has a fantasy world as well. Though women wake up to the reality faster, but they don't stay in it as long as men do. Because their fantasy world, they're used to their fantasy worlds being crushed over and over and over again, because the reality is once again unrelenting. Men, we have the ability to maintain physically, because that is our realm. We have the ability to maintain physically the physical world. So we can pile up our physical resources and go live in that damn fantasy world. Or we can, leave our fantasy world for a short period of time and go spend majority of our world back in the fantasy world, because we have the ability to pile up the resources in our fantasy world to maintain that fantasy world, or the reality, maintain that reality while we're in our fantasy world, so that it doesn't completely crumble. But anyways, how this works is that men get caught too long in that fantasy world. They whatever the fantasy world is, I'm not going to go into detail about who has this type of fantasy and who has that. It doesn't matter. The point that I'm making is that they stay too long in that fantasy world, and they start to believe stuff in that fantasy world, even though they know they are the creators of that world, and it's very artificial. From the house to the cars to the dogs, to the so-called relationship they thought they had with this woman, and, et cetera, et cetera. They start investing those resources that they once used to maintain their reality into their fantasy world, because they drunk the juice pretty much. They were sold a lemon, and they put all their money in stock into one thing, into the fantasy world. So here's what happens. They spend so much time in the fantasy world that when the woman wakes up to the reality of things that she's facing, which her emotions, strangely enough, tie her back to the reality world very quickly, the man is still left in that fantasy world. That's the reason why she can plan a whole lot faster than you can when it comes. Well, that's the reason why she detaches from you before you even know it as a man. If you're not paying attention, if you don't have this level of wisdom that I have, I can see it coming plenty of miles away. Soon as she says a left or right word from the central statements that she says and rhetoric that she makes, oh, I know it all top. But anyway, she comes back to the reality of things and she starts stocking her resources up in the reality, and you're still lollygagging in that fantasy world that you believe is real for whatever reason, even though you know you helped create that and it didn't artificially happen, you know. So, you know, she hits you with them divorce papers and then you're out. You get pulled back into the reality. But when you come back to the reality, you have given so much to that fantasy world that you no longer have the ability to maintain at the rate that you need to maintain your reality. It crumbled while you were gone. Now, the antithesis is true as well. That if you spend too much time in your reality, your fantasy world will die. Many people akin this to logical thinkers and rational thinkers and people of high intelligence. That's why it's often said, you know, people of high intelligence are crazy. Well, they're not really crazy. It's just that they don't have the high ability to create fantasy at the whim or live in a fantasy world. So they tend to face things head on. They tend to accept things for the way they are, and they tend to make the course adjustments that they need to for the best outcome for themselves and their reality and maintenance of their reality, because that's how it should be. That's how it should go. You should be able to maintain. And I'm one of those people. I've been called crazy and dogmatic all plenty of times. But I'm not, you know, I'm very fluid. I'm starting to learn how to build my fantasy world up again, because like I said, it's very important to humans. We need that. But you shouldn't live there. I lost mines due to being thrown into the red pill world forcefully. And I that's what my next video is going to be about, actually. It's going to be about who gives men red pills. It's going to be interesting. We would think that men give other men red pills. This is true, but only probably like 10% of the time. I mean, well, and they actually swallow them, put it that way, and they actually embody that. But it is women who give you the red pill. For the majority of us, it's women who gives you the red pill. They aren't Morpheus-like. They're more Sentinel-like. You know, that's pretty much how they are. But they give you the red pill. But anyway, back to my discussion. So it's very important that you pay attention to what you're investing your resources in. Are you investing your resources and how you're investing and what you predict for that? If you get caught up in the circumstances where you don't understand, well, if you get caught up in the circumstances where your life is perpetually in the same era, what I mean by that is you're with the same woman, you have the same kids. You can imagine, if you can imagine things being very similar to how they are many years from now, you're living in the fantasy world. Because as we all know, and I'm not saying that you won't meet a woman who, who can help you, well, want to live in that fantasy world with you and perpetually perpetuate your thoughts and ideas in the fantasy world. Although at the same time, it's very unlikely. Because once again, women's emotions wake them up to the reality of things. Men, we don't really readily have that ability because we aren't as tied to our emotions as women are. So we can get caught up in the fantasy world real quick because we have honor and we have what's the other one? Honor and I forgot it, whatever. But we have a lot of honor and dedication. We have a lot of honor and duty. So once we decide that's what we're going to do, we're going to do that. And we're going to remain faithful to that most times. Not saying, that's another story. I won't say that. But we have to be very cognitive of what life we're choosing to live. If you live in a reality too long, that fantasy world goes away. You start to be a disbeliever in anything that looks different from that doesn't exist. you become a imperialist. That's what imperialist. It's one who lives their life off of empirical data, things that can be proven. It's a lot of people that are atheists. They make sure that every move they make is relative to a study or a financial spreadsheet or a trend spreadsheet. These are the people who live very hard in their reality, and most times their fantasy world is very small, and it doesn't need much upkeep because everything else that can be explained about life has been spelled out in their empirical data that they have found, witnessed, or collected themselves. But anyway, this is going on a little bit too longer than what I want. But I just wanted to make it clear that there are two planes of existence. There's the fantasy world and there's the reality. If you spend too much time in one of them, the other will crumble and eventually die. Not completely off. You can also reinvent your reality and fantasy world, but they will eventually die if you spend too much time in them. But anyways, like, comment, share. I know I didn't say it on the last video, but whatever. I'm not, I'm new to this, give me a break, whatever. If you have any comments to say, go right ahead. I encourage them. If you have any wisdom to drop, go ahead. I encourage it. Once again, if you like the video, if you got any value out of it, throw me a like. And I'll probably set something up to donate if you want to do that. I don't, it'll help me pay for better apps and backgrounds and stuff like that. Not that I need it, but if y'all want some better content, that type of thing. But I like my delivery. If I didn't like it, I wouldn't do it. But I have a good creative mind. It's just that I'm not putting a whole bunch of money into the tools to create this stuff. Not me. I got other responsibilities. But anyway, this has been a Wolf in Beta Clothes. May you have a good day. Peace be with you. Until next time.